The courtroom was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The air felt heavy, as though something was about to happen. The usual hum of conversations had faded into the background, replaced by the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional tap of a shoe on the hardwood floor. Everyone seemed to be waiting, as if they could sense the tension that was building up, though they didn't quite understand why. The judge, an older man with a stern look, entered the room with deliberate steps. His black robe brushed the floor as he walked to the bench, the sound of his movements carrying across the stillness. He settled into his seat and adjusted his glasses, looking down at the case files in front of him. There was a pause before he looked up, his gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the faces of everyone present. The bailiff called the case, and the proceedings began. But the tension didn't ease. It was as if something was off, something in the air. As the lawyers stood, preparing for their arguments, you could sense the underlying conflict. There was something more at play today than just a typical case. Something that everyone, including the judge, was about to witness. Standing on one side of the courtroom was a black attorney, poised and ready for the battle ahead. She was in her mid-30s with a calm confidence that only came from years of dedication to her craft. Her suit was perfectly tailored, a deep navy that made her presence both powerful and understated. The briefcase she carried was well-worn, a testament to the countless hours spent preparing for cases just like this one. She had earned her place in the legal world through hard work, always proving herself with her sharp intellect and unwavering commitment. In the halls of law, she was known for her expertise, her ability to dissect any argument with precision, and her unwavering dedication to justice. But beyond that, she had a reputation for standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Today, she was facing off against a lawyer who was known for his aggressive tactics, his disregard for fairness, and his tendency to push boundaries. But she didn't let that shake her. Her focus was on the case at hand, and she had the facts on her side. The black attorney had prepared every angle of her argument, knowing that this would be no ordinary trial. As she stood there, listening to the opening statements, her eyes remained steady, her posture confident, and her mind focused. This was just another day in court for her, a day when she would prove her skills once again. On the other side of the courtroom stood the opposing attorney. He was a man in his late 40s, with a well-groomed appearance that seemed designed to project authority. His suit was a sharp, dark charcoal, the kind that screamed wealth and power. His demeanor was smug, his posture rigid and unapproachable. He was a man who had long since learned to rely on intimidation, using it as a tool to control the room. This was not the first time he'd been in court, and it wasn't the first time he'd let his prejudices show. Known for his arrogance, the racist lawyer was often criticized for crossing lines, making derogatory remarks, and using tactics that many would consider unethical. He was a man who believed in his superiority, not just over his clients, but over his colleagues too. And that included anyone who wasn't like him. Despite his clear biases, the racist lawyer had managed to climb the ranks of the legal profession. He had connections, a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom, and a knack for bending the rules to suit his needs. Today, however, there was something different about him. As he prepared to face off against the black attorney, there was a certain edge to his demeanor. He'd never faced anyone like her before. Not someone so calm, so composed, and so determined to fight for what was right. He straightened his tie and took a deep breath. This would be a battle, but it was one he planned to win, at any cost. The trial was in full swing. The black attorney had just finished presenting her opening statement, laying out the facts with clarity and precision. The courtroom was still. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of papers or a cough from the audience. She had commanded the room, and everyone in it could feel her confidence and expertise. Then, the racist lawyer stood up. He was smirking, his eyes scanning the courtroom as though searching for approval. His voice, when he spoke, was dripping with condescension. "Your Honor," he began, his words slow and deliberate, "we all know that some people are more suited to certain jobs than others." He let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "But I suppose we'll see how well Miss Johnson here can manage, given her lack of experience in cases like these." The words cut through the courtroom like a sharp knife. The insult was thinly veiled but unmistakable. He was questioning her ability based purely on her race. His tone was loaded with superiority, as though he didn't believe someone like her could possibly match his skills. A few gasps echoed from the back of the room, but they were quickly stifled. The judge's face darkened, but he said nothing. The black attorney, however, didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm, composed though there was a fire behind her eyes. She didn't need to respond right away. She didn't need to show any emotion. The racist lawyer had made a huge mistake. His words had revealed more about him than they ever could about her. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. It wasn't just the shock of the insult. It was the realization that this was no longer just about the case. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be ignored. The moment the racist lawyer's words hung in the air, a heavy silence settled over the courtroom. It wasn't just the kind of silence you'd expect in a tense legal environment. No, this was something different. This was a silence born of disbelief, of shock, confusion, and perhaps a hint of fear. Everyone in the room could feel it. The tension was rising, and no one knew exactly how things would unfold. The jurors sat rigidly in their seats, eyes flicking between the two lawyers. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed unsure of how to respond, while a few appeared downright stunned. They had come into this trial expecting a battle over legal arguments, not one over decency and respect. The judge, usually stern and authoritative, leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers drumming quietly on the edge of the bench. His eyes were fixed on the black attorney, but it was unclear whether he was waiting for her to react, or if he was contemplating his next move. It was a delicate moment. Too much of a reaction could derail the proceedings, but too little might suggest approval of what had just been said. The black attorney didn't look at the judge. She kept her gaze steady on the racist lawyer, her face impassive. The only thing that betrayed the slight shift in her energy was the small tightening of her jaw. The courtroom was almost holding its breath. You could feel the shift in the air, the undeniable sense that something was about to change. It was no longer just about winning the case. It was about how far one person would go to stand up to bigotry in front of an entire room full of witnesses. How far would the black attorney take this moment of injustice? Would she speak out? Or would she turn the other cheek? The world seemed to wait, poised on the edge of a cliff. The black attorney took a slow, deliberate breath. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as they waited for her response. There was no rush. She didn't have to prove herself in the moment. She already knew who she was, and the strength she carried was evident in her calmness. But she wasn't going to let the racist lawyer's words slide. Not today. Not in this courtroom. Not in front of these people. She rose to her feet, her movements steady and measured, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. The eyes of every person in the room were on her posture, her expression, her every move. The black attorney didn't show anger, but there was something far more powerful in her composure. Dignity. Her voice broke the silence, firm but controlled. Your Honor, I will not stoop to the level of personal attacks, but I will address the insinuations made in this room. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every eye was on her now, and you could feel the shift in the room. There was an unspoken respect growing in the air. And for a moment, the racist lawyer seemed to shrink back. She continued, her tone unwavering. I have spent years in this profession, learning, working, and earning my place here. I am not here because of some sort of favor or because of any other reason than my competence and my hard work. The same cannot be said for those who think they can make judgments based on someone's appearance or background. The racist lawyer stiffened, his smirk fading. The black attorney's words were like arrows, precise and aimed straight at the heart of his arrogance. The courtroom, once filled with unease, now felt like it was on the verge of something. Something big. The black attorney's calmness, her ability to speak truth without raising her voice, was having an effect that no outburst could ever match. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her eyes were locked onto the judge. I ask that we proceed with the case based on the facts, not the irrelevant prejudices that some may try to bring into this courtroom. The judge nodded slightly, his expression more serious now, and for the first time, there was a visible tension in the racist lawyer's stance. His arrogance was slipping away, and the once loud and proud attorney was left standing in the wake of the black attorney's powerful response. The room fell completely still. It was as though the world had paused, and for a fleeting moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. The black attorney's words hung in the air, each one carefully placed, each one carrying the weight of experience, strength, and an undeniable truth. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just because of the shock. It was deeper than that. People weren't just surprised by what had been said, they were stunned by how it had been said, calmly, with purpose, without a hint of emotion to cloud the message. The tension that had been building ever since the racist lawyer's insult now seemed to settle into something else entirely. Respect. The judge's face remained impassive, but there was a shift in his eyes. He wasn't looking at the black attorney anymore. His gaze had moved to the racist lawyer. A slight furrow appeared on his brow, and for a moment, the racist lawyer looked almost small. The bravado he had carried moments earlier seemed to have drained from him, replaced by a growing unease. He shifted his weight, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. In the jury box, some jurors exchanged looks, silent acknowledgments of the power of what had just transpired. One by one, their expressions shifted from surprise to something more reflective. There was no applause, no overt gestures, but the air had changed. The message had been received, loud and clear. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence that carried weight, a silence that made it clear who had won this small battle. As the silence stretched on, something began to shift in the courtroom. The black attorney had not just defended herself, she had shown everyone in the room exactly who she was. Her response, calm and measured, had turned the tide. She hadn't just silenced the insult, she had exposed the flaws in the racist lawyer's character. And for the first time, people were starting to take notice. The jurors, once stiff and uncomfortable, seemed to relax, but it wasn't a simple shift. They were now watching the racist lawyer through a new lens, one that no longer allowed his words to carry the same weight. His earlier bravado had cracked, and it was starting to show in the way he stood, slightly hunched, his earlier confidence now replaced with uncertainty. The once steady steps he took across the courtroom seemed less sure now, as though the room had begun to close in on him. The judge, too, seemed to be affected. His earlier neutral stance had softened, and there was an almost imperceptible nod in the direction of the black attorney, a small but significant gesture that didn't go unnoticed. The judge wasn't condoning what had happened, but he wasn't letting it slide either. His eyes, once detached, now seemed to weigh every word spoken in that room carefully, knowing that this wasn't just a matter of legal arguments anymore. The racist lawyer's earlier sense of superiority had all but evaporated. What had once been a battle of words now felt like something deeper. The courtroom had changed, and with it the dynamics of the trial. The change in the courtroom was palpable. The racist lawyer, once the picture of arrogance, was now faltering. His earlier attempt at dominating the room had backfired spectacularly. The smirk he had worn so confidently had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped frown. His eyes darted nervously, no longer meeting anyone's gaze for long. The moment the black attorney had spoken, it was as though he had lost his footing entirely, and now he seemed to be scrambling, trying to reclaim whatever authority he had left. His next words came out slower, more hesitant. "Your Honor," he started, but the hesitation was evident, his voice lacking its usual sharpness. He reached for his notes, his fingers shaking ever so slightly as they shuffled through papers that had once seemed so important. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain the smooth, confident tone he had started the trial with, but the effort felt forced, hollow. The racist lawyer had realized something in that moment. His earlier attack hadn't just been on the black attorney. It had been on the system, on the people in the room, and on the very principles of fairness and justice. And now, those same principles were turning against him. The courtroom had seen through him, and he was losing the very thing he relied on: respect. His fumbling speech, his nervous glances, and his inability to regain control over the room were all signs of a man who had been thoroughly unseated. The black attorney had shown him that words could be a weapon, and she had wielded them with precision. The racist lawyer was no longer the confident figure he had once been. He had been beaten, not by an argument, but by his own prejudice. The courtroom was still. The tension had settled into something quieter, more profound. The audience, though silent, felt the weight of the moment. There was a quiet shift in the room, a recognition that the trial had moved beyond just facts and arguments. It had become about something bigger, something more fundamental. The power of dignity in the face of injustice. The black attorney stood tall, her posture unchanged, while the racist lawyer, now visibly shaken, fumbled to regain his composure. It was clear to everyone in the room who had won this exchange, not with words, but with strength, grace, and truth. The room's energy had shifted, as if they had all collectively decided to stand with her. The judge, though still composed, seemed to have made up his mind. The case would continue, but the tone had changed. He looked at the black attorney with a new level of respect, and the once mighty racist lawyer could no longer command the same authority. The jurors exchanged looks, some nodding subtly, their faces reflecting a silent acknowledgement of the power dynamics that had just shifted. The courtroom had seen something important unfold, not just in legal terms, but in terms of character and integrity. The battle wasn't over, but the first round had been won.